So, Professor, I heard the end of your talk upstairs to the assembled crowd, and you finished off with just a thing that just caught me, and your message was, there was no pandemic.
Let's think about what a pandemic would involve. A pandemic would involve a situation where you have large increases in mortality. But the opposite happened. There wasn't a pandemic. That we were led to believe that a new novel deadly pathogen was circulating, right? And that the novel deadly pathogen would somehow escape China in some form or another, either in the lab from the wet market or that. But what we actually see is that there's no significant pattern of excess death, right, occurring worldwide that suggests that there's a viral spread. So in Europe.
Because even if the deaths were because of malpractice or treating it wrong or whatever, well, let's just ignore that possibility for a minute, and they were all because of this horrific thing called COVID. Still doesn't make it a pandemic.
No, it still doesn't make it a pandemic.
That's nuts. So, Professor, I heard the end of your talk upstairs to the assembled crowd, and you finished off with just a thing that just caught me, and your message was, there was no pandemic. Now, please remember, I'm not a medical professional, I'm not a professor, I'm not learned much, but, so, just in layman's terms, what do you mean? What does that mean in language that I and the audience would understand?
Well, let's think about what a pandemic would involve. A pandemic would involve a situation where you have large increases in mortality, lots of deaths in the general population, right? And that you would expect to occur worldwide, right? So the idea is that you might have a virus or a pathogen that's spreading throughout the world, people are contracting it and then they're dying. And they'd be dying in the absence of effective treatment, because if you had effective treatment for the virus or the pathogen, people caught it and went to hospital and they were treated and cured, there wouldn't be a pandemic, would there?
Yeah, there'd just be an illness.
There'd just be an illness, like catching the cold. Yeah, it'd be a routine thing, we got on with life and everything else. But the opposite happened. There wasn't a pandemic. That we were led to believe that a new novel deadly pathogen was circulating, right? And that novel deadly pathogen that somehow escaped China in some form or another, either as a lab leak from a wet market involving, a bat. That virus spread around the world and killed lots of people. But what we actually see is that there's no significant pattern of excess death, right, occurring worldwide that suggests that there's a viral spread. So in Europe, if you look at Scotland's mortality pattern, there's nothing to suggest that there's anything, over and above a normal flu year. If you look at Scotland's mortality pattern, there's nothing to suggest that there's anything, over and above a normal flu year. So it's not risk additive. You're not getting an extra risk over and above your normal flus. And somewhere like Germany, there wasn't any increase in mortality in 2020. Where there was an increase in mortality, there was massive spikes. You remember Italy? Bergamo in Italy, and you see the trucks with the dead bodies lining up the street. You see the scenes and the intensive care units and the panic, and that was shown, and as a full televisual feast on TV.
I remember it well. I've got a friend who's Italian, and he was living there in the middle of it. And I was talking to him because I thought we're following them. Exactly. Whatever they're getting, we're getting. Yeah. And it was damn scary.
It's frightening. And then we had the same situation in New York. You had a huge spike in deaths, and it was never off the TV for that period. Now, if you look at Italy, look at what happened in Italy. You would expect if there was a genuine pathogen spreading, right, it would traverse the whole of Italy. Maybe traverse the whole of Italy before it gets to the UK, right, or crosses the border into France. Yeah, that's not what we saw. The Italian pandemic more or less stopped in northern Italy. It didn't cross to the south at all. Didn't reach Sicily. Didn't go to Sardinia. And you see that across the board. But you get this pinpoint pandemic locally, not globally. The whole of Africa didn't experience a pandemic, right? Those countries that did nothing, went on as normal, didn't see a pandemic.
So this is something that I'm glad I'm getting to talk to you, a professor of statistics and analyse numbers, right? Were the numbers in Italy up that year? There's two things I want to ask you. Were the numbers in Italy up that the 2020 year, or were they normal?
I think off the top of my head, you'd say it within the bounds of normal variation.
Wasn't they spiked to death?
Wasn't they spiked? Yeah, but you got this spike in Bergamo. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and that's where all the TV crews were.
Right. That was where you had all the high dependency unit footage.
Yeah. So all the old people in Bergamo are supposedly getting this virus, but then 100 miles south, nothing.
And when you see something on the TV, it looks frightening, and now we know 100 miles away it wasn't frightening. That could be down to how we deal with the people that are all in front of us.
Exactly, it's a response, right? It's the response. It's the social context and situation that they're in, which can involve treatments, policies, procedures, drugs that they might have been given or not given,
and the combination that they could have been given. So another thing, it's great to have somebody that's specialises in statistics. 2020 baffles me, because in 2020, if we're keeping everybody in the house for a fair chunk of it, because it was 24th of March or 23rd of March at midnight we went into lockdown, and the only reason I remember is my birthday's the 24th of March, I kind of remember that. There's no people driving motorbikes, there's no people doing dangerous sports, there's no people getting STDs, because we're not mixing with anybody. So you would imagine then, did the figures come down in 2020 from normal with the sheer fact that we weren't getting out of the house?
Well, the interesting pattern that you've got to keep in your mind is that right until the point at which they announced the lockdowns, right, there was no increase in mortality. Right? There weren't additional deaths. Yeah. In fact, there were fewer deaths in Scotland than you might expect. Yeah. Right? So everything looks fine, normal. And it's only just after they announce the need to protect the population by getting into lockdown and keeping everyone at home, that it's only then that you see the deaths go up. And you see that, they went up, and you see that across all the countries that adopted these schemes. As soon as they announced that there's lockdowns, they put in place changes in how care homes and hospitals are all managed. And that has a huge effect on
these extra deaths. Because I would have thought, if nothing changed, right, we don't have people in motor cars, so road traffic accidents are going to come down, nobody's dying skiing. For all the numbers, it's not a big number, I would imagine. But my common sense and logic would have said, if there was no pandemic, say that the COVID isn't killing people, the numbers should come down because we're safer, because we're not going to have accidents. I don't know how many deaths in Scotland per year are accidents, road traffic accidents, climate accidents, all that stuff. Because they can't happen because we're not doing that.
Well, that's what the media focus was on, was in that benefit, that side benefit, that you would potentially, lockdown came with benefits. Yeah. You wouldn't see those deaths. But what you find is that there were more deaths at home. Right. So there were more deaths at home beyond the normal pattern of what you would see at home. So you get a transfer of how people are dying. They're not dying in hospitals, they're dying at home. So why are they dying at home? Mm-hmm. It's because they're not being treated. They're not being taken to hospital. Yeah. So they're either being denied treatment and forced onto NHS 111 calls and then perishing at home, right? Or they're not seeking routine treatment for a chronic condition and they subsequently die at home, right? So it's that change in pattern that shifts mortality into different categories, right? And one of them would be shifting it into the COVID category, because they declared everyone who had either a COVID test, right, positive, or suspected or probable COVID, that classified them to die within 28 days of that assignment of COVID positive. They called that a COVID death. So people that were dying of say cancer or dementia, they now die in a COVID death.
I just spoke to a gentleman, his mother was in her 80s, she was getting palliative care for cancer, and that was number 2 in the death certificate, that was the secondary cause of death. Yeah. And you're like, what? Yeah. So there was obviously that going on, and for whatever reason, I think that's another topic in itself, that why did we do that? So statistically, what were the figures? What made you come to the conclusion? I mean, I take it you didn't start for the point, I'm going to prove there's no pandemic. I imagine you started for the point as I want to look at this data. Right, and you got to that.
Yeah. I mean, we quite reluctantly embraced the idea as a conclusion that there's no pandemic. It wasn't something we started with, as you say. It's not a natural starting point. Like everybody else at the start of the pandemic, I believed that, why would they tell me otherwise? There must be. Yeah, it's on TV. It's on the news.
Yeah. BBC told us.
BBC told us, must be. And it wasn't until, I think it was March, there's a very famous epidemiologist and scientist called John Ioannidis, right? He's at Stanford in the States. And he wrote a paper that said that the fatality rate from infection for COVID was just like, for want of summarising it, just like the flu. Yeah, even Trump said just flu. Yeah. And the academic establishment, went absolutely bananas. Why is he saying this? It's dangerous. You can't go about saying things like this. It's genuinely deadly for people when he's spreading misinformation. So I thought, well, I should look at the data myself. So it was a lovely summer's day. You remember the first lockdown, the weather was a lot better than it normally is. So I sat myself in the garden with a laptop, got the data, did a much smarter model than John Ioannidis did, right? Just to up the bar a little bit. And lo and behold, I was like, yeah, he's right. Yeah, there's nothing different from this compared to the flu, right? And we published that paper. And after that, it's one question led to the next, and led to the next, and led to the next. And before you do it, you arrive at this conclusion that you never imagined it would take you down that path. But that logically, it's the only reasonable endpoint.
Yeah. So what we're not saying is, because that's a debate that we could have with other people having input into it, would be, was there anything called COVID? What was it? Right. That's a whole different topic. But what you're saying is, whether that's true or not, the stats don't prove. Even if there was a thing called COVID that was dangerous, it's kind of known in the stats that there was a pandemic level.
Yeah. And if you bear in mind that of all the viruses that we categorise and monitor and test, it's a small fraction that we actually know about. Yeah, we're surrounded with that stuff all the time. So these things are endemic. Yeah, and when you test for a virus in someone's nasal pharynx region up here with a swab, stick it up your nose, and then test it using a PCR and declaring it positive. It's a bit like realising your car's broken down and you have a look at the air filter and you conclude that the car's broken down because you've got pollen in the air filter, right? The cause and effect don't quite match. It doesn't make any sense, right? And there's been studies done back in 2015 by the Centre for Disease Control, which are the primary authority in the US for this stuff. Published papers where they did samples of viruses in people's chests, coronaviruses, influenza viruses, rhinoviruses, and the ones that were finding in their nose. And they found no correspondence between the symptoms you were having, right, respiratory cell, and what they were finding up there. Nothing, right? They said it was non-causative. This has been known, this is documented, it's in the science, right? But we were being told something completely opposite, right? So there was no, it doesn't matter what viruses you're finding up here, whether that's causing a respiratory illness, or even the absence of a respiratory illness. Remember, you were asymptomatic COVID. Yeah, that's right. The absence of it was still, well, you probably have COVID out anyway. You just don't experience the symptoms yet.
Aye. So, right, as a man that's well learned on statistics and analysing them, any year on year, you would have, I'd imagine, a small allowance for just something odd's happened, because we're not maybe taking the stats for the whole world, we're taking them in Scotland, so 10%, 5%, whatever it may be, would be considered normal, and it was nowhere near being abnormal then.
No significant change. So if you compare it to past pandemics, past flus, major flu seasons, what we saw in 2020 was insignificant. In terms of people's average mortality, in terms of how long they live, what happened in 2020, there was an increase in mortality as you would expect from a flu season, but it was comparable to our mortality rate in 2010, right? Not 1918. Right, or the Black Death,
that's no fair,
or Ebola.
But a normal year. Yeah. So did the figures go up?
Yeah. So you're getting an increase in death. Yeah. So
but nothing that would.
The question is what's the cause of that? So in Scotland, you might get, just off the top of my head, I might get this wrong. An extra 5,000 deaths. That's within the bounds of normality. But it's a little bit. Let's say, imagine there was an additional 5,000 murders. And say, well, that's within the normal variation of how many murders we have a year. So we won't bother investigating them because that's normal. It doesn't make any sense. Right? So it doesn't mean that these deaths are unimportant. right? It's not worth.
How did they happen?
How did they happen?
Yeah, but your stats are enough to reasonably argue the point that it's not pandemic level, because even if the deaths were because of malpractice or treating it wrong or whatever, well, let's just ignore that possibility for a minute, and they were all because of this horrific thing called COVID. Still doesn't make it a pandemic.
No, it still doesn't make it a pandemic. No,
that's nuts.
No. It's what I call a pinpoint pandemic. You only see these spikes in very, very local regions, like, as I say, Italy, Bergamo, New York, and then maybe somewhere like Madrid, but then everywhere else just normal. So if you didn't watch TV or speak to your neighbours, you'd be completely.
Wondering why nobody was out of the house. Why is nobody in the street? I get served off a quick at the news agency.
Yeah, so the most antisocial people, they're more likely to survive.
I never noticed any difference. Well, I've got good news for you. You've convinced me. And I come in most conversations with an open mind. I'm not a specialist in anything, which I'm not really a specialist in anything at all. I kind of need to approach every topic with an open mind, and you've convinced me. I think it's case proven. I'll rest my case, Your Honour.
Thanks very much. High five.
But no, I mean, that's a great insight. It's the figures don't stack up. And you're a professor of, what's your title? Is it Professor of Statistics?
All right, so Professor of Computer Science and Statistics. So,
so that's kind of your gig.
Yeah, but remember, I've got what I call outsider's advantage. So I'm not part of the medical establishment. I did a lot of research working with medics and doing lots of other things to do with it.
So Pfizer don't pay you?
No.
They're untainted?
Well, I wouldn't say that, but looking at an area where you've not been indoctrinated, you come at it fresh. Like you would, you just come as an outsider, man in the street, and look at it and you think, well, you'll ask the stupid questions. You see if the emperor's got no clothes. Yeah. So you just ask the stupid questions. And what we did is ask these questions quite carefully, forensically drill down into getting all the data, read all the papers in the literature to a degree that most medics and most academics don't bother, because they just assume they know the discipline, but they don't. So our book's got 1,000 references in it, man. So if you're ever mad enough to want to read all that, you'll realise how much effort we put into it. But we had to ensure that we did that, because if we're making big claims, we need big evidence to back it up. Right? So
particularly when the vast majority of the world are over here, they're saying the world's flat.
Oh yeah. There's a lot of personal danger involved. Shouting out, say you're all wrong.
Aye.
Without having somebody to back it up.
Aye. So when you're batting for the minority, you kind of need to get it right, or you'll be called David Icke.
Be called David Icke. Yeah. So the book, I'll do a gratuitous plug now. Yeah. The book's called Fighting Goliath. It's written by me and Professor Norman Fenton, and we've got some collaborators and co-authors in various parts of the book, and it covers the whole episode of what we call the COVID event, right? And it's focused on not just the statistics, although that's a large part of it. It's the flawed science and statistics behind the event. So it's uncovering what actually happened and what was driving what we've seen, right? And what you weren't allowed to talk about. So a lot of the material in it covers all the censorship we suffered, all the effort we put into exposing the manipulation of statistics by government bodies and by people, got organisations like the BBC. So it covers quite a wide range of things that are maybe a little bit more interesting than the statistics.
Well, what I'll do is when we put this out, I'll put a link into the book where people can get a blog on that, and if maybe.
Well, it's available on Amazon.
Aye, I'll put the Amazon link in the description so folk can see it. But no, fascinating story, Professor. I'm glad we spoke, because, as I say, my career, I've been a specialist in really pointless things like how to sell stuff to people. Nothing as glamorous as statistics or law or medicine or anything. And what I need to do then is you just got to apply common sense and logic. And I kind of find that that's difficult in the modern world.
You need to get the benefit of being secure in your conclusions and understanding of the world. You need to go through to get that comfort. You need to go through the discomfort of thinking, and that's really really painful thinking. It takes up a lot of time.
Yeah.
And you've got to go through whole phases where you're really uncertain and full of doubt.
Yeah.
And that's uncomfortable. Yeah. It's torture mentally. But that's what good science is about. You know, it's putting yourself through that process, questioning all that.
You're obviously an analytical thinker, or you wouldn't be doing this sort of stuff that you've been doing in your career. But you've got to tie emotion to it. Sometimes you can't just be super analytical. See, when you had that penny drop moment and you thought, shit, this isn't right. How did that feel?
Oh, well, there wasn't just one of them. There was a whole cascading set. So I felt at various points it was quite secure in my thinking about various aspects of it. Right. So for instance, one of them was when I read some work by a guy called Dennis Rancor, a Canadian guy, and he was revealing that this hypothesis that people weren't dying of this new respiratory virus. They were dying of, common or garden bacterial pneumonia, right, untreated.
Because we were treating it wrong.
Treating it wrong. If you got SARS-CoV-2 COVID, antibiotics wouldn't work because they don't work with viruses. Right? You know that. When you go to the doctor when you're like, I've got a flu, doctor, and they said, yeah, you're not. It's just a virus. Nothing we can do. Man up, have some chicken soup. Yeah. Yeah, have some chicken soup, and you're done. But so I read Dennis Rancor, so he said bacterial pneumonia. I thought, Christ, that's such an insight. But then, I found when I was trying to discuss it with colleagues to say, look, we've got to take this seriously. I was getting a lot of kickback. People weren't engaging with it because they'd sort of made up their minds. And it took me 9 months with a close group of people who are all quite prominent in this community of researchers to sort of persuade them. And then it's taken another year and a half after that to bring more people to that conclusion. But that's just one of a whole series of these kick up the backside moments where you get shocked into a new understanding.
Out of that group of people, how many of them came to the same conclusion as you now?
A very small number. Very small number. Yeah.
Well, listen, just one last thing I need to ask you as a statistician, because I do start awake at night and worry about absolute nonsense. Can you tell me why the stats on the effective of Lucozade for the went for a glass bottle that was dead syrupy with clear paper on it to the nonsense we have today?
You're right. Yeah. When it was old-fashioned Lucozade, if it had that yellow paper on it, that used to get in short windows.
That stuff. I used to have that Lucozade in it.
Stuff with the mannequins in it, and it would say "lovely" on.
So we get any stats on the effectiveness and efficacy of that Lucozade, the current Lucozade?
Somebody wants to fund a research programme, but I get to consume copious amounts of Lucozade and Iron Brew.
And we can get the original.
Bars want to send me Iron Brew, I'll do a test. Iron Brew versus Lucozade.
I would love to test the original Lucozade because it's not the same stuff. This will be getting cut out, by the way. This is just listen.
No, I'm glad you got on to the big question.
Aye, Lucozade. And it's Caramaca chocolate. That's another thing we need analysis on. Just keep me awake. But no, listen, see all seriousness, in fact, that's a serious topic. I'm really delighted to have spoke to you because I do think what you've told us and what you've shared with us is mind blowing. And the fact is, there's no pandemic.
Yeah. Thanks, Craig.
Thanks for your time, Professor.
Cheers.